Hello, we are glad you could join us as we continue to disrupt and advance. Following on for a successful series of digital events at Deloitte's and webinars, we're delighted to welcome you to this webinar, Disrupt and Advance, Talent Strategies Driving Digital Transformation, brought to you by Code Institute. This webinar is being recorded and there will be time for audience questions, but more on this later. First, some introductions. I'm Mike Wilson, CEO and founder of Ditto, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. Some notes on Ditto: we were founded in 2008, and we are a marketing and business development practice focused on emerging technology. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jim Cassidy, CEO at Code Institute, by Joy Macknight, Managing Editor at The Banker, and Barry Mulcahy, Learning and Development Director at Ulster Bank. So some words of introduction on our panel. With over 20 years of business development experience, Jim Cassidy is now CEO at Code Institute, a firm dedicated to bridging the tech skills gap and the productivity gap between developers and non-technical professionals. Joy Macknight is Managing Editor at The Banker, covering transaction banking and technology. Previously, she was Feature Editor at Profit and Loss, Editorial Director at Treasury Today, and Editor at GT News, the latter two publications covering corporate treasury. She also worked as staff writer on banking technology and IBM Computer Today, as well as a freelancer on Computer Weekly. And finally, to making up our trio panelists is Barry, who's head of learning at Ulster Bank, where he's responsible for building and implementing a learning and development strategy to enable digital transformation within the bank's commercial and services divisions. His extensive expertise as an L&D specialist span people management and development and organizational transformation. Most recently, Barry has been developing workforce technical skills as part of the accelerating digital transformation process. Disruptors, it's a pleasure to be moderating the session, and thank you very much for taking part in this episode of Disrupt in Advance as we break down the talent strategies driving transformation. So hello, how are we all doing today?
Fantastic.
Very well, thanks, Mike.
Great, yeah.
Well, yeah, great. Well, guys, this is a testament to the times we live in and the digital world we're all living in now, that we've all connected digitally to collaboration this, and we've all connected digitally with our audience participating. So it's really wonderful to have us here. And thank you very much to Jim and Code Institute for enabling this session today. So to begin, let me outline to our audience how the webinar will work. To start, I will give a short overview on the topic. The panelists will again give their insights into how talent strategies are driving digital transformation. They will have answer a question each after their presentations, and we'll kind of do a round robin to all of the panelists. And later on, there'll be time for an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions, please submit them into the chat room. So, okay, to set the scene with a short overview on the topic today. So digital transformation isn't a choice for industry, it's a necessity. And for financial institutions, the biggest blocker is finding the right talent to make this transformation happen. How can banks compete with young and agile fintechs, let alone the digital firms like Amazon and Google? As the race to hire the right people intensifies, is everybody missing a trick? So we're joined by a panel today who are dedicated to breaking down these barriers to enable businesses to thrive with a rich mix of employees and a diverse workforce with a multitude of skills, cultures, and educational backgrounds. We look at how some financial institutions are winning with varied teams, how tech upskilling is vital for the future, and initiatives are broadening participation in tech careers right now. So to get us going to kick off, if I turn to question one, what is talent mobility and why is it important now for financial institutions? And I think I'd like to hand over and kick off with Barry Mulcahy from Ulster Bank. Just your perspective on talent mobility and why it's important for firms like yours, Barry, but broader, I think, for financial institutions.
Yeah, perfect, Mike. So I think for me, talent mobility is all about having the right people in the right roles when your industry is changing so rapidly. And that's why it's a challenge, not just for financial services institutions, but all organizations. And for me, it's about looking at what existing potential that you have within your organization and unlocking that so that the great people that you have don't become obsolete within roles that have grown and that they grow and develop with the organization instead. So for me, it's about retaining good people, it's about developing good people, and ultimately not having to rely on a strategy to always buy in skills when you need them. So for this to work, I think there's a few things that you need one of those is just to know your talent really well. So a good talent management strategy to understand what skills exist in your organization, what capabilities can transfer across different divisional boundaries, and where do you have gaps? So where do you see the emerging roles, and where do you need to preempt with a learning and development strategy to be able to build those skills internally? And of course, all of that has to be aligned to your business strategy, which for most financial institutions is, keep costs down, become more digital, become more relevant, and become more purpose driven. So that's really where you need to put your weight behind. But for me, one thing when it comes to that I always think about when it comes to talent mobility is trust, and that's a massive selling point for financial institutions and banks like my own bank, where it's our competitive advantage over fintechs. So, there are some really, really smart companies out there with great technology, but we have colleagues who have built relationships and built customers over years. And that's what differentiates us in our market. And our customers are very loyal in terms of those relationships, but also as an organization, they're loyal to us as we kind of get ahead with some other technology pieces. So in turn, I feel a strong sense of responsibility to those people that work for our organization in order to develop them and give them a competitive advantage by reskilling them and moving them around the organization as the financial services landscape changes.
Look, I'd like to thank you very much, Barry. I'd like to build on that, Barry, and turn to you, Joy. You're a keen observer and commentator in this. You recently wrote a paper, so your perspective to share with our audience on what talent mobility is for financial institutions, and also maybe picking up on this element of trust that Barry was talking about. Is there a trust in
Yeah,
these organizations that everyone's job is going to be replaced by a bot or AI?
yeah. Well, I think that's part of the issue, isn't it? And I think Barry touched on a lot of things there. And for me, banks just can't get rid of whole swathes of their workforce and replace them with new recruits because A, they're having a tough time recruiting. They're up against the big tech firms and also fintechs. But they will also lose the domain knowledge needed to run their business efficiently and compliantly. So I think, as Barry mentioned, closing the skills gap requires not only firing and hiring, and there's no way to do that fast enough, but it must include a combination of upskilling, reskilling, and redeploying. Um, and this is a commitment to the existing workforce, the ability to upskill and retool. At a time when banks are making announcements about job cuts, so most recently HSBC announced 35,000 jobs were to go, and last year Deutsche Bank said it was cutting 18,000, Commerce Bank 4,300, and it's across the board really. So banks really need to think about the people that that are still in the bank and how to boost morale to keep the talent that they need. So as you mentioned, Mike, I spoke to a number of banks for a recent feature I wrote on transitioning to a digital workforce as part of the bank's digital transformation journey. And many talked about how they're paying much more attention to talent mobility within their organization. So, for example, I spoke to DBS, a Singapore bank, and they had decided very early on and against, common, advice at the time to bring the whole bank workforce on the journey to becoming a digitally transformed bank. And its hypothesis was that if a bank could create a climate for learning, the most people would get on board and would develop. And career development is also an undergoing modernization as employees want to really be more empowered about their choices. I also spoke to Pan-African bank EcoBank. They launched a career portal in mid 2019 following feedback that staff weren't seeing enough career opportunities. Um, Employees, they're giving the ability to really fully automate and demystify the talent and career opportunities in learning, which I think is really important because I think employees have to own their own career and banks need to give their employees the necessary tools and support to achieve what they can, their goals in life. And you think about EcoBank, it's particularly important because almost 3/4 of their workforce is under 40. So I think this is huge, and especially when you start to talk about how jobs are changing in the future, when you're bringing in artificial intelligence and machine learning. fundamentally, I agree with DBS. I think banks have to take their staff on the journey with them. They have to help them understand that in the new business environment and with new technology, they'll have to add new jobs, new roles. They'll have to let some of them go. Some of the tasks and roles will be, will be taken away, but the majority need to be lifted in a new way of understanding artificial intelligence and understanding, that it's not just a buzzword, that it can really help your, the way you do your job. It can change the way you do your job. It can make you more efficient, and it can really, advance your career at the end of the day.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to turn to Jim. There's a few things to touch on there. I think, Jim, I think for audience, just to kind of reintroduce Code Institute. So we've heard from, regulated firm from Barry, from Ulster Bank. We've heard from Joy with a perspective on DBS, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, Ecobank, lots of things happening there. From your perspective, Code Institute, just a few words on introducing Code Institute, the services and products you provide, and then your take on talent mobility and why you're getting such traction in financial institutions now, what you do at Code Institute.
Sure, yeah. So Code Institute is an online education provider that's essentially focused at helping people change career to technology jobs, software development jobs. So typically we work with enterprise corporates, governments, and direct with the students themselves. So we'd currently have, in the region of 1,800 to 2,000 active students from over 35 countries around the world participating in our online course, which is fully university credit rated. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide that, gateway to a new career for people. And obviously, as companies are undergoing digital transformation, trying to help those companies identify and find those hidden gems within the organization is what we're doing as well. So I suppose just to build on what the guy said there, and it's actually, there's not a huge amount I can add to that. There are two stellar answers. I suppose one of the things that we would also sort of look at is the requirement for change within, I suppose, status quo. So when people are looking at their career paths within an organization, oftentimes there are, I suppose, vested interests, or there are incumbents in place that might look at, I suppose, that job mobility within an organization as, potentially taking from one department to give to another. So people can be quite protective over, I suppose, their own staff, and be quite reticent to get involved in this new changing job mobility piece. So that's an important thing for companies to look at as well, is to make sure that all of the right stakeholders are involved and in place to allow that job mobility to actually happen. And I suppose provide those people who are looking to change career with some form of a career path, because as Joy said, there's a huge amount of transformation happening within the banks. So being able to turn around to people and say, well, here's an opportunity, this is where we're going to take you, this is the journey you're going to go on from where you currently are, in whether it's a sales or admin role, into a software development or more technical role. And obviously there's huge benefits in that in regards to loyalty, just in longevity of people staying with an organization, which as everyone knows is quite a difficulty these days. So that's, I suppose, what I'd add to that.
Yeah, great. I just want to, before we leave question one here, just Barry, you touched on, actually we should look internally first. We shouldn't hire, we should train. Is this a trend you're seeing folk around the people you're working with, the firms you're working with, say, do you know what? This continuous learning development, this route of career development before folk go and hire. How do firms balance this kind of immediate need to hire someone now, but planning ahead for training? And just, I don't know if,
Yeah.
I opened that up. I opened that up really for further comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real challenge, and I think Joy has pointed out, we don't have the luxury of having a market where we can hire loads of really talented people. There is a skills shortage, particularly in the Republic of Ireland where we are now, and the market is really competitive when it comes to talent. So there's a certain element that organizations can't just rely on the external market to hire in skills. I think there's a mind shift change that's needed, and our people have told us within our employee opinion surveys that we're doing a really good job at developing them for the roles they're in today. But as an organization, they need more support from us in order to help them to be skilled for the future. And that's really powerful when you get employees giving you that feedback directly, and it gives you a real burning platform to be able to do something. The challenge is, we know what roles may be targeted by things like AI, and we know that there are certain roles which will always exist. So we're always going to need good people managers. We're always going to need people who can design really good products and can design really good customer experiences. So it's about trying to balance how you develop people for the roles they're doing at the moment. So they still need to be really, upskilled on things like credit skills and core banking skills and risk and compliance, but then also giving them the ability or the tools that they need to prepare themselves for the future. So there's definitely challenges within there. But one thing I would pick up on is that what Jim said around having the right stakeholder management in place. Often what we have seen is, and it's quite natural when you think about it, is senior leaders wanting to hold on to their talent. So while it might be the right move for the person and for the organization, you can often, by moving talent around the organization, you can leave somebody else with a gap. So you need to think about the domino effect of talent mobility, and how do you solve that conundrum in order so you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yes, look, guys, we've had some questions coming in while we're chatting here, and I'm going to break with convention and take one of these questions now, because it does touch on something we all touched on there, which was people's fear of training and people being taken on a career path. And there's definitely a couple of questions that have come in around folks' fear around AI and technology replacing them. And I would just kind of open it up to the call. Maybe Joy, if you'd like to take that question first, just from your working with these banks and speaking to them about digital transformation, how front of mind, outside of DBS Singapore, which is laudable, but how front of mind is bringing people on the journey with them, bringing their current workforce on the journey with them?
I think it's top of mind at the moment. I think, we've moved from a situation maybe about 5 years ago when digital transformation was just beginning and everyone focused on the digital, which really meant they just focused on the technology and didn't think about the people aspect of it. But now I think that's completely changing and it's turned around because, if you think about digital transformation projects, in actual fact, a lot of them fail, and it fails because they don't have the people in place. And again, it comes back to that idea of trust and the commitment of the bank to its own people, and actually reskilling them for a digital world, because that's another thing. If you just get rid of like thousands of your employees, you know what I mean, you just put them into the dust heap of of history, because you're not helping them actually to transform themselves. And again, if you think about people that's had like 10, 20, 30 years in a bank, they have a lot of a lot of knowledge, they have that customer relationship understanding, they have all these things that can be used and transformed, but they need a path to do that.
I think this leads on perfectly to question 2. Please, if you turn the slides there, Abby, please. And so what role does technology play in delivering learning to a modern workforce? And I'm actually going to start this time with Jim, just building on what Barry and Joyce said there. And when you think about the technology, the role it can play, I know we've got some questions coming in from folk at the moment saying, how are people even selected for training? So Jim, maybe just to outline the role that tech plays, the role that you think tech plays, and how you go about your trade at Code Institute in that arena.
Sure. Well, I mean, I suppose the way when we think of technology, I mean, I suppose we'd say that, well, technology, it can't get in the way of the learning experience. So, when you look at, I suppose, a modern approach to learning, it has to be, seamless, supported. It has to be, I suppose, built around, I suppose, a need. There has to be. So it needs to be business aligned. It needs to be, I suppose, directly correlated to, I suppose, what the business requires. So, I mean, what we'd say is, the use of technology has to be, adding to the overall experience rather than taking away from it. What we've tried to do is we've tried to, I suppose, use technology along with the human element to try and create sort of like a hybrid of modern learning, whereby we can get the deep insights into what a learner is doing and how they're progressing in order to be able to support them with with human interaction. So, you know, we don't for a moment think that, you know, the human side of learning and the human interaction is gone away, but certainly through the use of data analytics and AI, that we can actually, I suppose, add to that overall experience. And if done well and done correctly, then, you know, the use of tech should be as good, if not better, than the in-class experience. And it needs to be, as I said, it needs to be flexible. So, you know, people are busy, people have jobs, they've got other things going on. So, you know, they need to be able to access it wherever and whenever suits them. So the learning experience needs to really, I suppose, tie into their lifestyle, as opposed to it being rigid and structured. So that'd be, I suppose, you know, my take on it.
Look, that's great. And Barry, look, as head of learning development for Ulster Bank, we all like to learn, we all like experience, but the onerous obligations of continuous learning and having to really stay one step ahead, how do you balance that kind of message to your colleagues with actually their desire to learn, or maybe the demands it might make you a busy life and busy workforce? I mean, what Jim said there is, you know, it's delivered technically, it's delivered digitally, so it's a convenient way to learn. But how did you, when you were telling your programs for Ulster Bank, think about the demands on your colleagues, or how did that
Yeah.
feel?
Yeah, so firstly, I'd say, you know, technology, it has been such an enabler for learning. And I still remember the first time we delivered training by webinar. I had just joined the learning and development team, and that was 10 years ago. And we had to get a paper signed off by the senior leadership team to not do classroom training. And that's almost flipped on its head now, Mike, where
You
we
had to
have
opt out. You had to opt
yeah,
out,
we have,
Barry.
and now we have to try, if we want to get people face to face and engaging. It's that's nearly the challenge these days. So, you know, it's just been such an enabler. I think definitely what I find with continuous learning, the challenge is the motivation. So getting people to see and take ownership of their own learning and make the time for learning. So people have extraordinarily busy lives, in work, outside work, and where you have to be booked into a classroom for a day for something, or have to be at lectures, you know, it's very easy to mark that out in your calendar. But when it's pushed back to you and it's self-directed, there's then an added complexity. There's two things I'd say that really, though, benefit in technology when it comes to learning and continuous learning. The first is informal. So we have tools now like Instant Messenger, we have Facebook at work groups, and we have Zoom video conferencing. And these are real enablers for learning. So people can ask questions on an open group on Facebook at work and get answers. People can share their screens on Instant Messenger and find out how to do things. They can do a quick Zoom video conference session on Lunch and Learn. And this is all starting, we're starting to see this take a life of its own. So I no longer have to be directing people to share knowledge. They're doing it themselves, and they're building a culture. So that informal learning, you know, just wouldn't have happened before. It would have had to always be written down in a manual or shared in some formal codified way. So that's massive, and that's not to be underestimated. And the second piece, when it comes back to what I'm talking about, is the motivation. With global content being available to everybody, so the likes of what Jim is doing in the Code Institute, but, you know, courses that are available on Udemy, you can now even do a Harvard diploma from your living room. That's a massive equalizer when it comes to learning and development, and that wouldn't be possible without technology. So all of a sudden, when I have colleagues who are based in Donegal or in Kerry that are far away from our training centre, they get the same experience as somebody in a head office location. So, you know, that is absolutely massive, and it's all down to technology.
And would you have, Barry, a kind of digital first approach when allocating budget? Is that the first go-to now rather than classroom based, or?
Absolutely. And you know what? Everyone prefers it. So we've done a lot of work looking at the data, looking at evaluation data, and, you know, people really respect the fact that they can dial in from home, or they can dial in from their branch or their business center. Our facilitators prefer it. And what you find is it's tailoring to that need of more bite-sized, more you know, in the moment learning, because we don't have the attention spans that we used to have. And even when you get people into a classroom for a full day, you know, people are exhausted after it. So people, it's like how we do everything else in life at the moment. It needs to be quick, short bursts, and the frequency needs to increase. So that's why we're seeing this big push for people moving towards continuous learning rather than, you know, one-off experiences when you do either a course or a qualification.
And
Thank you very much. Joy,
sorry, Mike.
pardon,
Sorry, my apologies. I was going to just to reiterate there what Barry said. I mean, it's amazing when we see when our students are interacting and when they're using the platform. And obviously, if we couldn't, it'd be very difficult to scale a business across 35 countries if we were doing it all in class. So we find that people who are working, they're logging in at unusual hours, weekends, whenever suits them, whenever sort of fits into their lifestyle. And as I said, that just wouldn't be capable if it was the traditional sort of in-class structured learning approach. So it really is. It's incredible to see, and that's oftentimes you might hear about people who are on their commute, and they're sort of taking in these bite-sized pieces of learning on the commute.
But I think that's kind of hit my point, though, that your commute time, rather than sitting down and reading a book or listening to some music or getting some off time at work. I guess, Joy, turning to you and your study and working with a lot of firms, I'm kind of interested in just playing this modern workforce piece. You mentioned EcoBank, where the majority are under the age of 40. So in what space does people over the age of 40 or 50 have in the modern workforce? Is there a fear of people being left behind? Is there a fear that although we have this wonderful technology playing a massive and fulfilling and enriching piece in people's learning, firm sense on their social obligations to their team members with this? I would just, if you could touch on that.
Well, I think it's really important that when you're talking about delivering, continuous learning, that means continuous learning for everybody. So the management or managers aren't excluded from that either, because they're usually the ones that are in their 40s or 50s or something. And I think about like SEB, the Nordic bank. So they gamified their training, some of their training programs and stuff. And so again, back to other people's points, it's like, it's on the mobile, it has a quiz at the end. When you do something wrong, you need to go back to the course and then you get it right, and then you continue on to the next ones. And of course, there's long courses with universities and short ones that they produce themselves. And they set a 20-hour target for the entire workforce over the year, so that management included, so that everyone had to complete 20 hours of training. And to be honest, they saw a lot of success in that, and that was across the board, from very young people to, as I said, also the older staff and things, and they're comparing their scores with each other, and it became, a competition and stuff like that. So I think that was, has been super, like, an interesting development. And I think, obviously it's the digitally enabled training that's important. But I think banks are really, they're looking at how, like, let's say EcoBank, not only does it have all these people, all these staff under 40, but they also, it's like Pan-African. So they have, operations across the continent, and they use digital training also to reach everyone, but they also have an academy. Right, so I think both them and US Bank was another bank I talked to, and they spoke about both having people sort of have more of a classroom environment where they can play off each other, but then also have this digitally enabled environment where you can collaborate, but not in a the same physical location. I also wanted to bring up something interesting that SEB has done on its digital learning platform, and it partnered with a company called Combient, and they actually put together a cross-industry network of about 30 companies in Sweden and Finland, like non-competitive companies, and they actually collaborated in developing this digital learning platform. But that also makes them actually more attractive, because obviously those markets are a bit smaller than others, but it also makes them really attractive towards some of the larger universities and cutting edge universities, let's say MIT, to actually curate digital transformation courses across those industries. So it's all taking all the sort of incumbent industries and moving them into the digital world.
And I thank you very much. So I'd like to move on to the third question, and the third question here is, what does a good program look like and why? And I've got kind of sub questions to ask for each of these folks, but also seeing that we're going to train, not hire. We've got these wonderful continuous learning and gamification and fun. but it's part of a conscious way of shifting firms, smart firms, to digital transformation. I guess, what does a good program look like, and why is it a good program? And if I start with Barry first, Barry, what does a good program look like, and why is it good?
Yeah, and I mean that, you know, there's something to be said that there's not one size fits all. It depends what skills you're trying to build. And you know, we used to say that if it's around knowledge transfer, then it should always be self-directed. So, for example, any mandatory learning which our colleagues would complete around risk or compliance or health and safety, we always use e-learning because it respects people's time. It gives them a sense of ownership. They need to complete it by a certain date, and like that, they can now do it on their phone and on their commute. So, you know, we've moved away from dragging people into classrooms or even onto webinars to read things to them. And there's a level of sort of respect that comes with a learning organization and a level of responsibility back onto the individual. I think then when you look at more formal capabilities and skills, you know, for me, there's three key things, and Jim touched on some of these earlier. First of all, it's the right level of flexibility. So if you don't have any structure in place and it's just go do, you'll find that people won't start, or they won't know where to start. So you do need to give people some structure and some pace or some expectations as you go through any sort of program. The second piece, like any good story, I guess, is a beginning, a middle, and an end. So people need to know where they start. They need to go and do what they need to do, but there also needs to be a celebration or a recognition at the end that they've completed. There needs to be some sort of milestone in order, and that can be, you know, in a continuous learning environment, that can be a series of milestones or badges or however you want to do it. And the third piece for me is some sort of human interaction. So I think the Code Institute do a great job in this space as well in terms of mentoring. So that's not necessarily going to be a facilitator at the top of a classroom. It can be somebody at the end of the chat board, or you know, in the future, it could be an AI assistant, but it's some sort of interaction that, you know, you're getting that feedback to say you're on the right track. You can ask questions, you can have debate, and that's how we really learn. And I guess the final piece, just building on that then, is can you bring real life experience into it? So can you get people to apply their skills straight away? And we see examples of that with things like stretch assignments or action learning sets, where people are given a task to complete in their role or in their business areas afterwards. And that can be really, really powerful.
Fantastic. And Jim, turning to you, you know, so setting out a good program, you know, what are the pitfalls? You know, what are the things that people should avoid? And we've just heard from Billing, when Barry said, you know, it's the right level of flex, it's a
Yeah.
reward, has a beginning, middle, and end, there's some human interaction. What are the things that you say are no-nos?
Yeah, and you know, it's oftentimes it's the exact opposite of the things that Barry has highlighted and things to do.
Yeah.
But you know, when you're looking at those types of things, you know, so you want to make sure that it's addressing a specific need, okay, so that you have a program that actually is you know, addressing a specific need. So, for instance, if there's a particular skills gap, that it is going to address that it's going to take people along the journey, and at the end of that learning journey, that they are, you know, whether you say that they're job ready or that they're capable, but that they can then move into actually actioning that role or taking part in that job. So the other things that, you know, would be a lookout is that there's not proper, I suppose, buy-in from the leadership, that there's not a clear vision as to, I suppose, where this learning experience is going to go. And oftentimes, you know, having good L&D people within an organization is vital, because they're the people who will, I suppose, provide that vision and, you know, I suppose, show the people who are going to take part in this learning journey where they're going and the benefits of it. You know, one of the things that we would do is we have this thing that we refer to as the 5-step coding challenge, which is essentially to try and identify people within an organization, what, I suppose, who are most likely to succeed. So again, it's to make sure that you have the right people taking part in this learning journey as well. And certainly for something like software development or learning to become a software developer, it's hard, it's difficult. So you want to make sure then that the right people are taking part in that learning journey as well, because it can be very demoralizing for people to be asked to take part in something and actually right from the outset they were really never going to succeed because either they didn't have the motivation or they didn't have the proper skills. So I mean, all of those things are really important.
And just to flow on from that thinking too about what a good program looks like, Joy, here we are. It's International Women's Day on the 8th of March, International Women Week. We've been doing a lot of work this week with women in tech. As part, 14% of girls go on to study STEM subjects. As part of these programs of training, is it more attractive to maybe ladies in the workforce who wouldn't maybe have considered the technical route beforehand, but to go through the aptitude that you laid out, Jim, and the actually it is suited to them? Is this a good route for looking at things like that? Is this how SMART programs should be built?
Well, I think the SMART program is really built on sort of personalization, right? And I think you do really need to, as Jim pointed out, you have to get the right people on the learning journey. And that means that you can't approach it with any kind of preconceived ideas of who is good at it and who's not. I think, it's really important that banks really understand their workforce to an individual level. I think that is really important. And I also think that people learn in a lot of different ways. I think banks should assemble, a bigger toolkit in terms of learning and training. So it could, consist of training directly, but it also could be competitions and being involved in external accelerators or internal incubators. I think all of these things should be tried. And I also think, like it's one thing to be competitive and everything, but I think to Jim's point, you don't want to set someone up to fail either, right? So you want to make sure that it's tailored to them, they understand sort of what's expected of them, and you really reach their real potential, and they have that feeling of, success and stuff like that. Because that's another thing is people are very scared to make this transition, and you have to give them the ability to do it and to be successful at it.
And in those programs, Barry, turning, do you advertise these internally? Just maybe share with our audience a little color on the type of programs you've put in place and how they're promoted internally and the kind of sign-ups you've seen.
Yeah, so I think we have quite a good engagement model within the organization for learning and development. So we do it at three different levels. So first of all, at a grassroots level, every division has a people board, which look after the interests of colleagues in that business area. So we attend those people boards and we're able to offer programs and opportunities directly, I guess, via that forum. We then attend executive or senior leadership team meetings on a regular basis to give updates on learning and development. And the third piece is we have a strategic capability forum, which is a group of senior leaders, myself and our HR director, who look at the capability strategy for the bank and how we drive that forward. So we kind of use a three-pronged approach with those three groups to advertise or market any reskilling opportunities or opportunities to build capabilities for the future. But alongside that, we make everything available to everyone. So, for example, we partnered with IBEC in Ireland on financial services apprenticeships, and that's looking at reskilling colleagues in data analytics, and that's something that we've offered out to all staff, and anybody who's interested can put themselves forward and be considered for it. So I think it's very important, and I think Joy has made this point as well, is that we need to use a variety of tools between self-directed external programs, professional qualifications, and then just some thematic programs around specific skills. So for example, in our branch network, we've done a huge amount of work in reskilling frontline colleagues to be able to support customers to move on to digital products. That is a change in that role. So if you think about that frontline role, it used to be behind a counter, counting cash, taking cash in, preparing drafts, doing transactions for a customer behind a counter. All of a sudden you're out, you're on the banking hall, you're talking to people about technology, about safe passwords, about cybersecurity, and your objection handling as to why people can't use the app, and you're trying to help them do banking in a more convenient way for them. So, you know, that's a specific program that we've gone out to target and do, but it's about the variety and having a little bit of pick and choose. But also then when you've got something really specific, you need to maybe then target and define that target population really well.
Super, fantastic.
Mm.
Folks, I'd like to move on. If everyone's happy, and you got any closing comments, I'd like to move on to question 4. Is everyone happy we move on?
Sure.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
So this is now, I think it's great. It ties in a lot of things that we're talking about. So the benefits to the firm, the benefits to the individual. I'm going to start with Jim. You know, when you're sitting down, meeting with folk like Barry or like Joy, and talking to these financial institutions, and you're outlining the benefits case. What type of benefits case are the firms seeking to achieve, and how are they measuring them?
Well, I suppose there's two things that they predominantly look at. So one is the benefit to the business, and then one would be to the benefits to the individual. So the types of things obviously that the companies are looking at is, you know, sort of increasing the pool of talent. So you know, if they're predominantly looking externally, and they're predominantly then looking at their competitors and sort of the talent that they have there, well then obviously then if they start to look internally, they're going to increase that overall pool of talent. It'll also hopefully then reduce the hiring costs associated as well, because as Barry rightly pointed out, you know, the sort of the war for talent is only getting hotter and hotter. And so and an interesting thing at the moment is that, you know, a report came out there recently that said that there's like, you know, 126 million people across Europe have substandard digital and technological skills. So it's not like, you know, going out into the market in general is going to sort of find that talent. It just isn't there. So people are either poaching from their competitive set, or they have to find it internally. So we're looking at, I suppose, reducing those hiring costs. We're also then talking to them about, I suppose, the culture fit. So people internally within the organization, they already are familiar with the culture of the organization. They know how it works. So they have that, I suppose, that organizational knowledge. So we talk to them about, I suppose, the benefits of that. So we also then, you know, we talk to them about the reduced requirement on the temporary outsourcing contractors who can be expensive as well. And then also the increased loyalty that I suppose, showing people how they can have this career path within the organization, the increased loyalty that brings to staff. To the individuals, obviously they gain more relevant skills, they upskill technically, they make themselves, I suppose, more future-proof for the changing, the changing world we live in. Obviously, in many cases, it avoids redundancy. So, you know, if there's some form of offboarding or change to the organization, then this provides an opportunity for people to upskill and obviously avoid redundancy. Again, increased earning potential. You know, there's I suppose there's no way getting around it, but you know, people who have these technical skills tend to earn more, and certainly software development, you can become an expert in a given area within software development in a relatively short period of time. So obviously that's quite attractive to individuals. So we talk about all of these different benefits, both the individual and then to the organization itself, and it tends to be, you know, I suppose fairly robust in terms of, I suppose, the reasons why companies should look at it.
Oh, thank you. And moving to Joy, the same question, Joy, from your study and working across all these financial firms, did they have target ROIs, and how were they measuring this? Or what was your sense that in terms of embarking on this on these programs and these firms, what were they baking into the financials?
Well, I think, you know, in terms of what Jim was just saying, I agree with those are all the real drivers. I do think that obviously, you know, keeping internal staff is really important, but it also, if you have a very good culture, if you have a good program of career development and things like that, you also are much more attractive to new recruits. And as you're really trying to compete against the, you know, the big tech of this world, I think that's going to be a really important aspect to win the war on talent. You know, and I think, like, say, like I spoke to US Bank for one, and they see it as a way to ensure that its new recruits understand its commitments to ethics as well, and that it's doing the right thing and supporting their career development. So I think those kind of things are really important. I think in terms of you know, ROI, I think you know, it's very straightforward because you can save so much costs in terms of the need to hire in, you know, external experts. And if you really think about the people that you're talking about, you know, like you know, data analysts and things like that, and AI experts and things, like their wage is incredibly high because they're in very high demand. And so any bank, you know, I was talking to another Nordic bank, Danske Bank, and they were working very closely with the university in order to try and, you know, create courses that then they could bring back into the bank, and they can, you know, have people coming out of university straight into the bank, and you know, actually building out their whole data analytics and stuff. So, you know, it's a big war on talent. They really need to think about this going forward, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. But I do think that again, yeah, like to have all of these things in place is actually going to make a huge difference to them.
I think, Barry, turning to you, the same question, benefits to the firm and the individual,
Yeah.
and also, I guess, maybe just to outline, you have a great sketch here of the senior leadership team,
Yeah.
of how you got together to talk about the capabilities of the firm, and kind of, and it sounds like a really vigorous process you have in place here. So how did you look at the benefits of this? How did it impact the individual on your firm? And then just maybe elaborate on the senior leadership buy-in to this and the training they
Yeah.
went on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, you know, I'm not going to cover old ground because I think, you know, Jim and Joy have given a really great overview of the benefits there. The one thing that I would say is that, you know, the era of people having a job for life is over, but that doesn't mean that you can't stay with one organization and have 2 or 3 different careers in one company. And that employee engagement, that retention, that culture, organization culture that we spoke of, those reduced hiring costs just come with that as well. So there's a mind shift change where we need to think about you know, multiple careers in one companies, and that really helps when you're trying to sell it to senior leaders. The second thing I'd say around that is we also spoke a little bit about return on investment there, and with a lot of programs that we're seeing emerge now, you know, the cost in terms of comparison to maybe 5, 10 or 10 years ago is significantly lower. A lot of the online learning, the external learning that we can do is very, very cost effective. So you do need to think about, you're making a calculated risk in some cases, and you're thinking about, you know, you may not have the evidence to show that there's going to be a direct return on investment, but there is, the investment is quite low. So there is that balance that needs to be made. And then I guess when you talk about leaders, I think for me, we often forget that we can leave our leaders behind. And, you know, in one of the earlier questions, we spoke about the importance of stakeholder management and all of this. We need to think about how we bring leaders on this journey as well, because it's not just good enough to have people working in teams who've got great knowledge around AI or data analysis or coding or anything in that space, but you also need leaders to move from a traditional role into maybe a more cutting edge role, I guess. If I can give you an example, we may need in the future traditional branch or bank managers to be able to lead people designing a new digital project from end to, or digital product from end to end. But the investment there is, if we reskill that bank manager in the same kinds of skills that we've been talking about to date on the webinar, we get to keep those trusted and developed people skills, which are so hard to find and have been nurtured over years and are in keeping with the organization's cultures. So we have a big responsibility in learning and development to bring leaders on a journey and help them lead in a digital age.
Oh, fantastic. So we've wrapped up the formal parts of the questions, and I've got some audience questions that have come in here. So I'm going to start. There's one that's come in here. What are the specific skills we need to build to face a digital transformation? So I guess I'll start with Joy. From your study, Joy, what were the typical retooling that was happening to assist with digital transformation as part of your study?
I thought what was interesting in some of the conversation I had, which was, okay, so you have a whole bunch of new digital skills that are needed and you need to transform them, obviously. And then you have a lot of people that have these, the business understanding. And what came out was that there seemed to be a lot more need for a bridging role. So people that weren't the total tech heads as such, but had an understanding of the technology and how it could be applied in the business sense. And so this was an area that a lot of the banks are starting to look at in terms of how to train up their workforce to be able to, fill those bridging roles.
Oh, fantastic. And Barry, thank you very much. And Barry, in terms of your senior folk getting together and looking at the capability of the firm, what gaps are you identifying? What are the things that need to be considered for your workforce to make sure to bridge that digital transformation gap?
Hello.
Oh,
Barry.
Maybe I'll jump in here, Mike.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Apologies. I hadn't
Well,
unmuted
definitely know
myself.
it's real time.
Yeah.
I was talking away to myself there for a good 30 seconds. So yeah, there's two key areas, I guess, which we know and we're really confident are going to be skills that are needed for the future, and they're digital and data. So by digital, we mean being savvy around our digital products, being able to sell them to customers, being able to talk with digital fluency. And then around data, it's all about what data can give us and how we can analyze. But to Joy's point, it's how we can visualize data and talk about data when we're not data experts. So with our senior leaders, we've done a huge amount of work around data fluency and understanding what you're asking for when you're talking to a data expert. Then for our I guess for our wide audience within the organization, we've picked 5 critical people capabilities, we call them, and they're critical thinking, being change ready, being a trusted advisor, improver innovator, and being connected or networked. And they're the 5 capabilities that we're going to be aligning everything in our organization to. So we will recruit against those capabilities, we'll manage performance against those capabilities, and we'll give development options against those capabilities. So by just even naming them, they may change in the future, but even saying now, these are the 5 things that we want as an organization to work on, that gives employees a lot of ownership, and it gives senior leaders something that they can use as a North Star when talking about building capabilities for the future.
I love the idea, because corporate values and corporate culture are things, when you say they're written down on paper, but these kind of learning capabilities and the DNA of the firm is fantastic, tremendous. Jim, I think this would be a great moment to have a chat with us about the Code Institute and your industry working groups and your work with industry and the type of trends you're seeing there and the types of gaps that are being identified as part of those industry working groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, just to build on what the guy said there, actually, because and this hasn't been rehearsed. So one of the main roles that we look at as well is what we refer to as the integrator, and as Joy said, it is that sort of that role that sits between, I suppose, a number of different colleagues within an organization who can, who has that level of technical knowledge, who isn't someone who is deep rooted in technology or a software developer or a data analyst, but has that, understanding of technology, and who can, either help bring along a project or act as that interpreter between the people who are sort of very technical and then the non-technical. So that's a role that we've identified as being really important, and it's something that we have a product called Diploma in Tech Fundamentals, which has been relaunched this year, which is specifically aiming at that type of role, to give people that common shared language, so that whether they're talking to a software developer, data analyst, that they can have those meaningful conversations, and then obviously bring that information back then to those non-technical people. So that is something that we've identified as being really important, and that's also what we're hearing back from our industry advisory council. I suppose on a broader sense, from our software development diploma, the types of areas that we're trying to work in there are to give people those foundational skills to go on and work in in software development, or looking then at DevOps being of particular importance, and then lastly then, as has been mentioned a number of times, is data and data analytics. So to give people that foundation level, so that allows them to transition into one of those key areas that are, I suppose, in high demand.
Fantastic. And just maybe share with our audience, we're coming into the conclusion part now, but just key highlights on the road ahead, Barry, from Ulster Bank. I know you do a wonderful hackathon as well in Dogpatch Labs each year there, but is there anything coming down the road in 2020 you think you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, so I think, and this is where we have moved the development and the capability agenda into live action as well. So I think our hackathon is a great example of where people can get engaged with technical teams. They can try and solve problems and create new products or new services or new offerings for our customers and our colleagues that will make a real difference. But one of the other pieces, and I think Joy alluded to it earlier, is we also have a staff incubator in progress. It's a program called Startup, and that's where colleagues take an idea for whether that's a product or a service, and they are partnered with entrepreneurs over a fixed number of weeks. They get mentors, they get some development to support them with that program, and they're given time away from work to, I guess, explore the ideas, bring them to an innovation council and see if they can get funding. So you're bringing that entrepreneurial spirit, that critical thinking, and also the opportunity to maybe come up with something really exciting and new for our customers. So a great example of where we see capability leaving the boundaries of human resources and being really tied to how we make change and how we innovate for the future.
Brilliant. And Joy, March edition of the Banker is a wonderful top 1,000, first 50 years of the top 1,000 World Bank. So anything to share with our audience on anything that's happening with the Banker to look forward to keep an eye out for in 2020?
Well, yeah, it is the 50th year of the top 1,000 World Bank ranking. So the Banker kicked that off in 1970 when there was only 300. It was the top 300 World Banks. And then we obviously moved up to 1,000, I think, about 20 years ago. So the March issue of the Banker really has my boss, Brian Kaplan, who's editor of the Banker, wrote a really good piece charting the last 50 years. So which banks were on top at the different decades. And our July issue will have the 50th anniversary. We'll have the 2020 top 1,000 World Banks ranking. So yeah. Look forward to July.
Brilliant. And Jim, just what do people keep an eye out for things with Code Institute coming up in 2020?
Yeah, so as I said, we're relaunching our program, our DITF, which is I suppose aimed at those integrators. So we're looking forward to getting that launched and then continuing to, I suppose, to move into opening up a number of different European offices and continued growth. So the one takeaway that I'd sort of put out there in this when it comes to digital transformation is that hopefully companies will, I suppose, start to look beyond the immediate or near term when it comes to people, that they have to sort of think around that sort of 2 to 3 years plus around their people strategy. And it's great that working with Barry and Ulster Bank that's how they're looking at it, because in real digital transformation and taking people along this journey, it's not something that's easily done over a short period of time. And unfortunately, HR and oftentimes L&D are, I suppose, a lot of the time they're managed based on those near-term or short-term KPIs, which is then difficult to sort of enact any sort of meaningful long-term change.
Well, thank you very much. Well, just before we go, guys, I'd like to hear one closing comment, about 30 seconds each. If there's one thing you'd like the audience to take away from today's discussion, what would that be? And let's start with Joy.
That's a tough one, 30 seconds. I guess my big thing is you need to be flexible. We're now in a very dynamic and fast changing environment, and you need to, take all the digital tools that are coming out and partner with industry leaders to really take everyone with you on the digital transformation journey.
I love it. Brilliant. Barry?
Yeah, so for me, there's two quick things, I guess. First of all, it's not to be afraid to try new things. So oftentimes it's really hard, as Jim has said, for us to sell the benefits of and we're managed to short-term targets. But if you think about the secondary skills that you can acquire with something like a coding challenge that Jim's involved in critical thinking, problem solving, that's really powerful. And the second thing is, don't forget that some of the most important skills for the future we have right now. So things like good customer experience and good people leadership, they are going to carry on into the future.
Fantastic. And a quick closing comment from Jim.
No, just to go back into, just so as I said, just think beyond the immediate term. Identify those skill sets that are going to be required in the medium and longer term for the business. I suppose build out those career paths. So share that vision with the people, and I suppose when rolling out any of these initiatives, communication. Over communicate. Use traditional and digital methods. And make sure that those people have clear timelines, and as was mentioned earlier on, it's important that they have those deliverables as well, so that at the end of it, that they understand what those outcomes are.
Fabulous. So many thanks to Code Institute for bringing this session to market, and also to the panel, Jim, Joy, and Barry. What a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. This session has been recorded and will be published in the coming days. For more information for today's slides or to discuss any of the topics from today, our panel's inboxes are always open. Connect with them on LinkedIn. Keep up to date with Disruptive Advanced series by following Ditto TV and social channels, and do check out LinkedIn there for Code Institute. Until next time, thank you very much for attending. I look forward to welcoming you to the next one.